Okay, so let's create an action that will create new band. And since we are going to create a resource, the action is going to be HTTP post. So it's going to be a public, and again we can create an action result, and that's because we know that we are going to return a band DTO. After we create new band, we will route back to our getBand action, and we will display the information of the newly created band. So we will return band DTO, and I'll call it createBand. And in order to create a band, we will need to, of course, supply the band class to it. And since this is a complex type, it will come from the body of the request. Now we don't have to specify it because it's a complex type, so it will come from body by default and the API controller will know that. But just to be clear and explicit, I will specify that here anyway. So it will come from body. And what is coming from body is the DTO that we just created, which is the band for creating DTO, and I'll call it band. Now the first thing we should do is to check if band is null, except we don't actually have to do that. The API controller will automatically return band request if the input is null. So we don't need to do the null check here. So the first thing we need to do here is to map the band for creating DTO to the actual band, because we are of course going to be saving the band itself in the database, not the band DTO. So I'm going to create a variable and I'll call it band entity, because this is the entity that's gonna be saved in the database. And we'll go to the mapper and we'll create a map, and this is gonna be the map between the band and the band for creating DTO. So we'll go to our entities.band, and the source is going to be the band that is supplied into this action. So that's the band for creating DTO. So now the band entity is ready and we can save it in the database. So we'll go to our repository and we will add the new band. So we will call the addBand method and pass the band entity to it. And remember, this simply saves it into the context. In order for us to save it in the database, we have to call the save method. So we will go back to our band album repository and call the save method. So now the band is saved in the database. So what do we do next? Well, what we can do now is call the getBand action, pass in the band ID of the newly created band, and display it. So it would display all the information of the new created band. So now what we have to do is to create another map, and this time between the band DTO and the band entity. And since now we are actually talking about output, because we are simply going to display the newly created band, so the map is going to be between the original band DTO and the band entity. So let's create another variable, and I'll call this one band to return. And we'll go to our mapper, create a map, and the destination for the map is going to be the band DTO. So this is for our output, and the band entity is going to be our destination. And now we can return the newly created band. So let's do our return statement, and we will use created@route, because this one creates the object that produces the status code response, but also it will redirect to our action, and in our case it's going to be the action getBand. So created@route, and we are going to call getBand action, but in order to call it from the created@route, we need to name it. Now of course the action is called getBand, however we need to assign it a name in our attribute. So over here in the HTTP get attribute, we will also pass in a name, and the name we can give it is get band. So it's gonna be the same as the action itself. So now we can refer to this action by its name. So down here in our created route, you can see there are 3 overloads, and the one we are going to use is the one that expects the route name. So in our case, that's going to be the name of the action, so get band. And the second argument is the value itself. If you look up here, the action expects band ID, and we need to pass in to this action. And we also need to name it as band ID. It has to match the argument being passed into this action. So here we will create a new instance of the band ID, and that is coming of course from our band to return of the property ID. So we have the route name, we have the route value, and now we will supply the object itself. And this is the object that will have the content value to format the entire body of the entity. And it's coming from our band to return. So that's going to be the return band from this action when created at route. And with this, the action is ready. However, we created a new map here between the entity band and the band for creating DTO. So we need to go to our profile for the band and add this map as well. So we will create another map, and this one's coming from the models dot, and we are calling the band for creating DTO, and we are mapping it to the band itself. So that's the entity band, so entities dot band. So with the map in place, we can now run it and test this.